So yeah, welcome everybody. I just, as a caveat, will just say, once I start my presentation, I can't actually see what's going on. Meet and Google Meet and my presentation Keynote does not seem to want to work together, so I can see both this screen and my presentation. But I think it'll be okay because we're just going to run right through it. Again, just for those who have joined, we're going to start recording this, and we'll just kind of run into it. And thank you for everyone being here today. And I will launch this thing. All right. Well, first, welcome to this STG Brown Bag. I'm glad everyone has been able to join us, and hopefully we'll be able to learn something together today. And I'm just going to run through this, and hopefully we can, save some questions for later. If you have any questions, I'll be happy to answer at the end. And I have an outline for a lot of my references and things if you want to do some further research. So first, welcome to STG, and second, welcome to Rebirth of the New UX Superhero, Strategies for Succeeding in Feature-Driven Product Teams. I'm Matt Kitt, and a bit about me. I've been doing UX or product design or web design for about 22 years. I've been a designer of things, process advocate, and lover of the phrase, there's got to be a better way. Let's be honest, a lot of that's because myself, I'm kind of lazy, and laziness induces ingenuity. So that's a part of, I like getting things done quick and easy. You can ask my wife kind of about the process thing. We go to weddings, and oftentimes I walk into a reception and I just cringe, because even at something as simple as a reception, it's like, hey, there's a certain order that people need to go, right? And you don't put things to make it more difficult, right? The bride and groom are in a certain spot, the presents go in a certain place, the book signing goes in a place. So those type of things drive me nuts all throughout my life. Hence why I'm a product designer. I love to solve problems, and they come up often in all things. I went to school to be a graphic designer. I went into multimedia. I went into illustration. I went into photography. So I had 4 degrees all going at once. Decided on multimedia in that direction to go to actually finish. But I love all things design and creativity. And then you add on top of that my love for psychology, and it's the perfect fit for UX for me and what I've done in my career so far. So we'll just move on to it. Today's outline. All right, first we're going to define what a feature-driven, otherwise known as a shiny object syndrome product team is and why it's a problem. Next, we'll discuss the 4 stages of the superhero journey: the origin story, rebirth, assemble, go, fight, win. And we'll just go over some of those things and how that kind of works. So our first question is, what is a feature-driven product design team? What does that even mean? There are a few things that you can do research on. FDD is actually a development process for using features and developing features. That's not what we're talking about today. What we're really talking about is something called shiny object syndrome. Okay, there's a team, and what that means for a product team is a team that's plagued with shiny object syndrome, which is a continual state of distraction brought on by ongoing belief that there is something new worth pursuing. It often comes at the expense of what's already planned or underway. It's rooted in the childhood phenomenon of always wanting a new toy, even if your current toy is just fine, right? So it seems like, check out Apple. What are they doing? Should we do that? Right? At my last job, we did this all the time, where we'd be working on something, and because something new came out, say from Apple, we'd watch, even their animations, how nice things were kind of looking. but we didn't really measure that, right, against necessarily what our teams needed. And so, but it would help us divert and we'd go off the opposite direction. Myself, I mean, I have to admit, speaking of shiny object syndrome, I'm a total victim of this, and I do it all the time. I've been into things like Bitcoin, NFTs, online stores, MLM. So I have boxes and boxes in my garage of useless garbage. Stuff that was supposed to make money. Endless photo projects that I haven't finished. And now, as you see here, and kind of been seeing throughout my presentation, my newest thing is AI art. It's kind of fun. It's kind of cool. Being a former illustrator, it gives me a lot of tools to just produce kind of fun things, right? And so I just jump from thing to thing, and I don't allot enough time. Well, the same thing can happen as it does to me to our product teams. We can find the next shiny object, the next kind of thing to go after, right? And that's where the beginning of our UX superhero journey starts. Whether we're new to a team that's already in production, whether we join a team and we're starting out fresh from scratch, right? There's a change in management. There's leadership that is just enamored with the love of shiny objects, right? And they're moving all over and changing the target. Whatever that is, we're often dropped into that as UX designers. Now, we're still in a field that's young, and most of us come from different professions. Not all of us went to school for it, and we're specifically focused on it. For me, that was a long time ago I went to school, and it was called product design. It was called something else. Like I said, multimedia was one of the names for kind of the skill sets that we have. You could be a graphic designer. You could be in project management. You could even be in IT. Some people are even from human psychology, right? And that's because there is a certain level of psychology that goes into what we do. So our backgrounds are wide-ranging. And so it's an interesting field because for many companies and organizations, design has always been more about branding, making things looking more professional, which is still true, and we still do a lot of that. But a major shift has kind of happened in what design means, at least in the forward-thinking companies. Now, UX designers are brought in to solve really complex problems that must be solved in order for companies and organizations to be competitive. Great design is now expected, right? It's the norm. So that's great for us, right? Because we're designers, we love to do it. It's a big part of what our job is, but not all of it, right? But for this reason, designers have been put in the center of the product development cycle. Or, well, maybe in the center, maybe at the beginning, maybe at the end, maybe a little in between, or maybe all of the above, right? And this is where the real disconnect is. Because so many times the company says, hey, we need a designer, not really knowing what that means, right? And so when you thrust a creative, right-brain thinking person into a development cycle with the expectations of them understanding business goals and usability problems, often leads to a disconnect between the designer and what they've carefully crafted and present and what the stakeholder wants. So we end up in meetings with stakeholders who don't know how to do our job, but consistently tell us how they think we should do our job, right? It can be super frustrating, especially for designers. But hey, it's also for the devs too. The devs are often caught in the middle of this, right? They're in the middle of it and they're just like, hey, I just want to code, and yeah, please don't spill my coffee. Because between the business and the UX, there's a lot of stuff going on, right? So that's kind of a layout to the story. But every journey, or the layout to the journey, every journey, though, has an origin. An origin story is when a business wants to bring us into a new project, right? It's like I said before, sometimes they understand what we do and what we can bring to the table, but most of the time we're underutilized. And it's easy to see why we're underutilized with so many superpowers or skills, right? And us changing our alter egos all the time. I mean, are we UX design? Are we UI design? Are we product design? Are we web design? Are we mobile design? We have so many different names right, that we kind of go by, it does make it kind of difficult for them to even nail down what it is that we do, right? So here I am as a designer, whatever our title may be, and in we go. Now we're part of the team. Now, as a team, we're excited, right? We're excited when we launch this thing. We've got some good direction, well, most of the time, and we have a make it work attitude with a willingness to learn to work together and a lot of some sort of caffeine, right? But then we hit the grind, and the full level of what's required to complete our task and our goals kind of sets in, right? And it's easy to get discouraged. You hit a few roadblocks, you run up a couple competitive things that you need to take care of, whatever that may be, and it becomes easy to get discouraged, right? And it's easy to start looking elsewhere for answers. So along come the shiny objects, and all of a sudden, we're off course. This is an important moment for us and for our teams, right? How did we crash? How did we even get off course? There's a lot of different reasons for that and a lot of different variables. But we all hit these points in our career, and they can become some of the most difficult times in our lives. Many of us have experienced it. Go through this, and it's tough. It's really tough because of where you're sitting, what people understand about what your role is. And it's because not only does it require us to stay the course while growing and adapting, it also requires us to force our teams to refocus. We have to become leaders, and that is no easy task. So when this happens, I just want you guys to do something. Remember who we are. We're problem solvers at heart. For us, failure must be a lesson every time. All right, how do we start, right? For us, sometimes the only thing you can do is look at the man in the mirror. Look at yourselves, right? And so one of the ways that we can kind of start and to really truly get our teams to focus is that we have to employ our tools, talents, and skills, our superpowers, if you will. Even those superpowers that take us out of our comfort zone, and there's a lot of them. There's things that we may have to learn, right, and grow. And I love this quote: there is no growth in your comfort zone. And I've learned this time and time again throughout my career, is just, if you're comfortable, you're not learning, you're not growing. And so it's even great to put ourselves in a lot of those situations, right? But first, we have to identify our superpowers, right? What are our superpowers? Can we fly? Can we read minds? Can we shoot webs? Well, recently, our team here at STG put together a list in one of our practices. And here's kind of what it looked like, kind of from a list point. And that's a lot of nuts. I mean, skills, lots of skills, nunchuck skills, right? We have so many. This list is huge. And where we fit in within technology, business, and design, it is massive, right? And we're super eager to use them all. When you learn a new skill, when you learn how to do sprint facilitation or a certain kind of collaboration, we're super eager to use that, right? But we have to decide which superpowers are appropriate for right now, in this moment when our team has crashed, right? Because if you have a team that can't understand the need or don't have the ability to do a workshop or a sprint or even how to use it, then we need to start smaller and build team capability and trust, right? And that may be through something like a process flow and using that, a workflow, something simple and easy that they can understand, use, and visualize. And if you look at this list long enough, I hope one of them really kind of jumps out, one of these superpowers of ours. And it's more powerful than any other in this entire list. And there's some close seconds, but this is the powerful starting point of our journey. Let me give you a hint. You may have seen this comic before, and it is what is said versus what was heard. So what was said? Honey, tomorrow is that picnic with my colleagues. Do you think I should wear that new dress I got with the blue ribbon? Man, I guess so, if you want. What was heard? You can't watch football tomorrow. What she heard? You're fat. Ready for me to tell you the single most important power? Communication. Now, the greatest power being communication really comes from a lot of my experience in, for me, that is what has defined the difference between lower level design and designers that have a real seat at the table with the decision makers, is the power and ability to communicate. If you're not good at it, get better. Watch YouTube, read books, read articles, practice, right? Because the things that we're going to have to communicate to our teams and our companies are things like the company's process. What is their process and how do we measure it? Their competitors, what are their competitors doing that they're not doing or that they are doing? And how to go around that. About the users, what are the users feeling? What are their needs, wants, and desires, right? What are the industry standards? Measuring success through KPIs and metrics, or your roles and skills, right? Even that needs to be communicated at some point. So what are our tools for great communication? And these are some of the things that can be found both in articles and kind of all over the internet, and just things that I found also in my career, right? Some of our tools are listen. Assume you might learn something from everyone in the room, right? We're not the smartest people. And, if you're a designer, you've done stuff before, I've designed something up and the developer goes, hey, why didn't we just do it this way? And you're like, well, duh. And I just spent 5 hours on something that the developer helped us with in like 4 minutes. So assume that you might learn something. It's great. Okay. Respond thoughtfully, right? Don't become a Peter 3. In the new Spider-Man movie, we have 3 Spider-Mans, for those who maybe haven't seen it. And at one point, Spider-Man number 3 talks about pulling punches, right? And you think about how powerful you can be with your own message, right? And oftentimes we're passionate. We're really passionate about what we're doing. And we will go after it. We'll talk to people. We'll tell them what we think. But sometimes we got to pull back a little bit and really take the time to respond in a thoughtful manner, because if we don't pull our punches, then we're just going to work with a lot of beat up people, right? And we want them to be a part of our team. Credibility is as important as philosophy, right? There's a lot of philosophies out there, and we got to have something to kind of back that up. So people have to believe it to buy it. As Lincoln once said, you can't fool all the people all of the time. If your words lack sincerity, if they contradict accepted facts, circumstances, or perceptions, they will lack impact. The words you use become you, and you become the words that you use. I think that's pretty powerful, right? To kind of have some of that credibility. Next, provide context and explain relevance, right? You have to give people a why, and that comes up a ton. What are people's whys, right? You have to give them the why of that message and tell them that therefore, before you tell them that therefore and that's so. If it doesn't matter to the intended audience, they won't hear it, right? They're competing, so many competing voices, that it has to be relevant to them, and it has to be within context of their lives. So whenever communicating, do your best to do that. Next is consistency matters, right? There's too many people, organizations that want the next new thing, right? We look at commercials, right? Doritos, every year there's a competition. They need the latest, the funniest Dorito commercial that you can come up with. But by the time that you understand, they're on to the next thing, right? And so they aren't consistent in that message, where other messages, last a really long time, right? from different entities, right? Like Nike, just do it. They're consistent. And so you remember those things. The next part, especially with working with your teams, ask questions. Again, not only will you learn something, but the person you're talking to will feel heard. And everyone wants to feel heard, right? And the last step of this is visualize. Tell a story that paints a picture, right? As you talk to people, make it so that they can see it. Okay. The next part of how we increase our abilities. We really need to understand the push and the pull. And this is a great talk. And it is based on the question of what do you do again? I mean, I've heard that before in my career a few times, right? And I'm afraid I might trigger some people with this, but here we go. So in a recent conference I went to, there was a great talk given by Lou, and I can't pronounce his last name, but he's from Boston, but it's Lou Simagalia. Anyway, it was a fantastic talk, okay? And in this, he talks about the push and pull, business versus UX. He and his team conducted interviews, research, and discussion for over a year around this topic. And they found that people are really candid, and this is kind of what they found. So here's a few quotes from them. Dealing with UX feels more like dealing with the creative police than the creative department. It seems like there's a misunderstanding between what is design and what is UX. I think of UX as creative content and design that is creative, but I question the definition now. It seems like it seems less about creativity and more about standardization. Quality is where we struggle the most. We focus more on getting buy-in from product owners. UX used to be a part of the squad. Now they act like an external stakeholder, and product is beholden to them. Design has a seat at the table, but is it just a high chair? Are we just sitting on the edge of the room? Lane clarity is a problem. All legs of the stool really cannot be equal. That's about how it feels sometimes, right? And a lot of this is familiar. You know, you've heard these things in the business. There's really a disconnect. So again, this is an important moment. We've been having the wrong conversation, right? And Lou goes on to say that there are two questions we need to ask. The first being, are we understood by our stakeholders and teams? That's an important one, right? We need that seat at the table. We can't just be in a high chair. We have to be involved in a lot of those decisions. The next question is, are we creative? But I'll take that a little bit further because creative can be in so many ways. Are we creative in our solutions, or are we just making things look pretty? Are we being properly utilized? And some of that is our fault, right? Because what is your focus? We really need to define our role. We must make it known what we bring to the table, or we'll continuously be underutilized or working on projects that are destined for the scrap heap. We can and we should do more for our products and organizations than just make things look pretty. But how do you define your role, right? It's time to have those tough conversations. And there's help. There's lots of different methodologies. There's lots of ways that you can learn to communicate and learn to get a seat at that table, you know, through trust and through activities. One method that I learned about that I like is called RACI or RACI. Again, not great at pronunciation. But the definition, oh, sorry, you're not seeing that. There we go. RACI. It's an acronym. Now, where I work, we love acronyms, so it might fall right in line. But it's RACI. The definition, sorry, having some fun. All right, the definition is known as a responsibility assignment matrix. Outlines how individuals with different specializations will participate in tasks such as work phases. For example, discovery activities, usability testing, and creation of deliverables, right? Designing prototypes. And it's what people do, right? It's their different roles. And this can really help identify what your role is compared to everybody else's, and also allow you to find gaps and ideas to where to put your skills to use. So I find it to be a pretty good way to go about it. I won't dive into it too much because we can make a whole workshop on how to do this and why, and we just don't have time right now. Okay, but a quick rundown of the acronym might interest you. So this is something from Nelson Norman Group. You can look it up again. It's in my outline and references. But responsible, right? R equals responsible. The role or team member completes a task. There can be more than one person responsible for any task in product development. For example, a user researcher might be responsible for running a quantitative usability test as a part of the iteration and optimization phase of product development. Accountable. A is for accountable. The person provides a final review and determines whether and when the task is completed. For each task, there should be only one accountable person. Accountability is essential for an organization and team. Without it, it's difficult to get people to take ownership and get things done. In some cases, the accountable person is also responsible for completing the work or deliverable. And I'd say that's in some pretty rare cases in what we do, but it still does happen. Obviously, there's things that we're responsible for, and I love this here when it talks about accountability or decision making being one person, right? Because that's not how it is for a lot of my teams. I have a lot of stakeholders, and oftentimes I have to pull those stakeholders into a room all together or into a meeting all together so that they're all there so that we can finally be accountable and make a decision. That happens actually quite frequently. So that's something to have there. And then C equals consulted, right? We want the whole team to be able to be consulted, and the role provides input and expertise on the task. There's usually multiple people from various disciplines and levels marked with a C in the hierarchy, depending on the phase of product development and activities involved. In our example, usability test, a UX manager might be consulted by a UX lead to get feedback on the study protocol and understand if there are any peers on the UX team who would benefit from the research findings. Okay, so everybody needs to be informed. Somebody needs to take responsibility for that and make sure everybody is. And informed is the next one. The roles are kept aware of progress, right? Like the responsible and consulted roles, there are often many roles kept informed, including stakeholders, leadership, and other product teams who may be impacted by the work. Informed parties could also include people from customer support, legal operations, marketing, human resources, and in smaller organizations, even the CEO. Been there and done that where the CEO was involved in everything. So then those roles become really important on who's responsible for what. Great. Well, this can help you define the day-to-day. Something that I find more effective as a tool against especially shiny object syndrome is the why. Now, there's a lot of stuff out there on the why. I'm a big fan of Simon Sinek and his book, Find Your Why. I think is something that's really useful that all teams or all people should understand is the why, right? And we understand this with a lot of different terms as UXers. Excuse me. But we need to identify the why. The driving force that all other things should be measured against, right? That really does help with shiny object syndrome. And when you understand the why of your organization and even your why within the organization, right? When you find that, tattoo it on your forehead, okay? And maybe it has to be in reverse for the mirror, right? But you tattoo it on your forehead, right? Because we want to make sure that our organizations, our leadership, our companies understand that we understand the why and that make it clear that their goals are our goals, right? And what we do. So just to kind of recap how we kind of rise we need to identify our superpowers, our skills, right? We need to know what those are going in and when to implement them. We need to understand that our greatest power is communication with our teams and make sure that we do that, right, and get better at it. Third, understand the push and pull. Get on the same page. You saw those quotes, very painful, right? When leadership thinks you're doing one thing and you think you're doing another, and you don't ever kind of come together and make that work, right? And then define your role. Make your why clear. So now we move on to the next of our journey, our superhero's journey. We need to assemble. Now that we have positioned you and you are a master of the most important superpowers, we have to understand that we have to pull our teams and our stakeholders and their superpowers in, right? We need a team. It's time to assemble and take on shiny object syndrome. And when we're talking about that, I like the line from Jurassic Park. We're going to need more teeth, right? We need more help. And that's why I talk about bringing a team in together. We're going to need some help. This really funny meme's been going around. I laughed pretty good at it. And, then I had to look in the mirror. But it's been going around, right? Did you find a developer to design your app? Yes. What did it cost? Everything. Okay, and there's some real truth to that, because when a developer makes something, it often looks like this. And it's something like this that costs Citibank $500 million. Because of the application being built funny, the person didn't understand and hit a few buttons, and boom, $500 million later, Citadel's in some pain. Right? But to be fair, did you find a designer to develop your app? Yes. What did it cost you? Everything, right? Same thing. This is what you get when it's only a designer. Man, that's pretty. I'm not sure how it makes any money, but it looks cool. So obviously, we need to work together. But I almost forgot. What if a stakeholder designs and develops your site? Jurassic Park, right? Spared no expense, ends humanity. But if we all work together, we can get something that's elegant and that flat out works. It works on everything, mobile phone, desktop. It's elegant, it's easy to use, produces what it needs to do, and hits its goal. Well, the next thing we need to do once we've come together is that we have to evaluate. We have to evaluate where we're at within the organization. And one way to do this is to evaluate a maturity levels via the maturity matrix. So I found this model, and some of you are probably very familiar with this, some of you may not be. And what it does is gauge level of maturity of UX within an organization, right? And you can see one is the bottom. UX is not very important. And top is UX is embedded, is in the very fabric of the organization and not discussed separately, right? And it's a nice overhead view. But let's take it one step further. Recently, I was on a team with Kirsty, and we had to not only figure out the organization's maturity level, but individual teams within the organization, right? And again, shout out Kirsty, this was amazing. We got to work on this a little bit with her, but she really put this together, and it's a great example of what sometimes you have to do, and a great measuring stick, especially when you're dropped into an organization, right? And it's just a small sample of what this whole matrix looked like. But if you take it and you look at it, and you see we have different categories, we have subcategories. Next, we have a score and a goal, right? And then we have the levels. Well, the score and the goal are very useful in saying, okay, where is the team currently? That's the score that they're given. And then what is the goal? Where do they want to be? And through this, I know that we both learned, especially that it's okay to be at a level 2 if that's all your team requires. But if your team is at a level 3 and needs to be at a level 4, it can be really damaging to what you're trying to do if you're not at the right level. And so this type of matrix is really good to get a team to a certain level. And we can kind of go through it, right? So design understanding, time of initial design activity. So this is when we bring the design team in. And at level 2, right, it's managed and it's repeatable. But, that means it's mixed. Sometimes we're in there prior to coding. Sometimes it's right in parallel with what's going on, or we're brought in right after they've done it. And that can work, right? I've had one situation in a level 2 where I was in that exact situation, but we had some things put together. We had a design system in place. We had devs that understood the design system and had a whole library that they could use, right? And so a lot of that product, we spent jumping in different parts of it. And, we took and in that product, we actually cut 4 months off of a process. So a process that people had to do, that users had to do, was taking about 4 months. We got it down to 4 days, right? And so the level there was just fine. But in another project that I was on, if I wasn't in the level 4, if I wasn't in those initial conversations, we would have started going down a path that would have cost a lot, right? And in that situation, because I was involved early, able to talk and bring in the development team early, we're actually able to come up with a solution that ended up saving 6 months of work and probably hundreds of thousands of dollars for the organization. So where you're at on these levels is really important to understand, right? Because we use this to evaluate what a team's need is, right? We need to be able to allot resources, or the proper amount of resources, to a project, right? Whether that's embedding a designer or we act like an agency, it's going to kind of fall somewhere in there, right? Secondly, we got to make a plan to get to the desired level. So this type of tool is really, really helpful in that. And so, this was something that was a great opportunity. Next, create a roadmap, right? And again, roadmaps are one of those things that we could do an entire workshop on. I'm not going to do that again today, but what I will say about roadmaps is that you have to have one, right? That's first. And second, you want a roadmap that creates cadence of small wins to allow time for the big wins. So this is a really great example. So if you look at this, that first row, we're looking at the quarters, right? Q1 through Q4. That first row has accomplishing one goal or a list of those goals in a very good rhythm, right? You're getting those small goals throughout the year, which is great. And having that allows you to have lines like the second and third line and the fourth line where you have a lot bigger projects, and they're going to take time. But finishing those little projects along your roadmap in a good cadence will allow the trust to build. And once you have that trust, you can accomplish some of those really big goals, and you have a little bit more wiggle room to work with. All right, the Rocky montage is over. Eye of the Tiger just finished. Stop lifting your weights, put down your tools, put down your utensils like went on your cooking show. Cue the villain. So at this point, we've had our training. We need to prepare for the attack. It's time to strike our pose, right? My pose is the Black Widow. Love it. It's awesome. Great pose. Hurts to get back up with my back, but it's a good pose. So one of the first things that can pop up in shiny object syndrome is new versions and opportunities. Oftentimes, right, what I talked about earlier, other visions and opportunities will pop up and without evaluating the true cost first, right? And they can be great ideas, but they'll really prevent any meaningful progress from happening on your team. Right? We're often in that stage of just because we can. the Jurassic Park just because we can. And I mean, whose idea was it to have a function that turned off all the power to all the gates throughout the entire park? Hashtag backup generators. So how we deploy a solution on that? We sit on the idea. We have to do what we need to slow it down. Let's slow the team down a little bit. And I know a lot of product managers hate that, but spending a little bit more time now can pay huge dividends down the road, right? Do some more research on the idea and think about whether this is the best use of the company's resources. Not every idea should be acted on. And giving yourself a little bit of buffer time can spare you and your team months of throwaway work. Another thing that pops up is everyone stops listening, right? We stop listening to customers and stakeholders, users and their feedbacks, right? And their needs. When we stop listening, we lose sight of the why, and we put work on our devs that isn't helpful. For example, I've worked on a project that has project managers, a manager, an admin, instructors, and students, right? And we build this project, and there are two sides. And during this project, we're using communication or wording that the student understands and different wording that the instructor understands. And at some point, those two are going to come together and have a conversation, right? The instructor will need to reach out to the student. And if we're using different language on one side and something else on the other, then it's really easy to have confusion ensue and they just talk over each other, right? I think one really good example of this is I worked with some developers that the two guys carpooled together for 3 years. These guys carpooled together and they're like the best of friends, but they would always argue over a few simple ideas that they had, right? And they came from different organizations that use different language. After 3 years, I was there when they were sitting at a table and they finally realized for 3 years they'd been talking over each other, saying the same exact thing, but because they were from different organizations using different language, they never actually connected it. So, I mean, yeah, when you stop listening, it can cause some issues, okay? So what do we deploy? We need to communicate with our teams, right? When you have a new idea, talk to your team members about it, ask them what they think, and listen to their perspectives, their concerns and their needs, right? We need to have an open conversation, a place to bounce ideas. But more important is that there are subject matter experts that we need to listen to, right? A bunch of these people have either been there for years or they're an expert in their own field. And some of those people are the strongest proponents and supporters of why, okay? And communication can be really difficult. Like you've seen a lot of things pop up recently in this talk even about poor communication. So one thing that I like to employ is take out the I, right? You're not the authority even when you are. Okay, and this method, especially when you have strong personalities involved, will really help when you're communicating with others. So what I mean by take out the I. Don't start your conversations or your sentences with I would, right? I would do it this way. If it were me, I would, right? Instead, we have found, it was found, best practice is in the design system, right? We want to appeal to an authority higher than ourselves, right? And if you have a team, well, the team has found that we've done this. It was found by a certain group or other that it was done this way. Best practice in the industry dictates this, right? You get a little more weight and a little more power to what you're defining. And so it helps alleviate some of that contention that might happen within your communication. So just one thing I wanted to bring up that I thought was pretty useful, at least through my career. The next problem that may arise, we lose sight of team resources and we start burning cash, right? There are hundreds of technology tools that are impressive, effective, and downright fun to use, right? I mean, we found this really cool thing in Figma where it's got, rock, paper, scissors, and it's been fun. It's fun to play with, right? But if you keep adding and adding and adding all these things, pretty soon you're distracted, right? And unfortunately, if you subscribe to every service and you jump on this platform, then that platform, you'll end up burning through so much money that even Peter Parker will pity you. So how do we combat that? Again, set goals and stay on directive. We got to slow down, right? When you start to shift gears, we need to slow down and make sure that we can actually do that, right? We set long-term goals for every project, including how long you anticipate the project will take. We set short-term goals to help you close the gap and keep the team really focused on what they need to focus on, right? Because it's really easy to lose sight of a team's capabilities, especially with shiny object syndrome. If something new pops up, right? We built a team. Our organization built a team that can do X, but can it do Y, right? And rebuilding a team, adding new capabilities to it can cost a lot of money just to switch a few gears. Okay. Then we have inability to finish, right? Finish our projects, right? We get excited about a new project before the first one is complete, right? And it may cause you to lose any long-term benefits or meaningful results, right? And this one comes along, there's a few examples of what people have used for it in the past, but whether it's building a bridge, right? You start building a wooden bridge to cross the chasm, and you stop halfway because you're like, well, the metal bridge would be stronger, so let's start doing that. Well, then a stone bridge comes up because it's cheaper, right? And all of a sudden you have a bunch of half bridges over this chasm that are incomplete, and you've never reached the other side. So it's very important then to deploy abandoned projects only when necessary, right? Once your long-term goals are in place, don't abandon the project until you get there. Even if something great comes up, and that happens all the time. One method that we can use is a method called the 80-20 rule. And you'll hear about it in some organizations. They call it 20% time. 80% of your time, you're focused on the business and your role and everything that you're supposed to do. And you get 20% time to go during your week and say, okay, how could I improve this company in some way? And you spitball and go find the shiny objects, and you do that for 20% of your time, right? I have to do that with my life because I love shiny objects. I'm all over the place. So I have to really focus with my family, my time, my work to give it 80% of my time. Well, it's probably more like 90. And then the other 10% of the time, I can have that wild hair and go do whatever I want to do, right? And so that's one of the things that would really help in a lot of situations with this as well. The only exception to abandoning a project, right, would be if your project starts costing far more money than anticipated, or the landscape has changed significantly enough to undermine the project's effectiveness entirely. And that does happen. Unfortunately, it really does. Well, cowabunga. Today, we look over a grateful universe. Well, not really, but we have identified problems that arise in future-driven or shiny object syndrome product teams, and how to deal with some of those most common problems, right? We have to reinvent ourselves, our teams, and we've armed ourselves with strategies for success. So thank you. Thank you for coming to this presentation. I really hope that I've covered some important topics for you and that you have taken away at least one valuable thing or one valuable lesson from me today. I will leave you with one more important thought. We may not be the UX superheroes our teams want all the time, but we can be the ones that they need. And in the end, we'll have teams that love to work with us, that ask for us by name, or even hold off on a project till we're available. All true stories, all things that I'm sincerely grateful that have happened to me in my life. Again, thank you for watching. Thank you for showing up today. And lastly, if you want to connect or continue the conversation, these are where you can find me. I'm on LinkedIn. I have a website. I have an email. And you can find me through STG. Love working for them. Shout out to them, and very grateful for the opportunities that they've provided. And I'm happy to take any questions that anybody may have. And that's a wrap. Sign out, Jen. Are people able to unmute?
Yes, they can.
I just wanted to say that was really good, Matt. I really appreciate it, especially bringing in that exercise we did in the practice of showing all the different skills that we hopefully have or can develop in our profession. I think it's also important to kind of relate to clients that we might not have all those skills. They might not need all those skills, and we have to kind of figure out what best resources fit for that client as well. So very cool.
Great job, Matt. Any
Thank
questions?
you.
Matt? Anyone?
I've got one, Matt.
Yeah.
You know, I'm not going to camera. Like, I just worked out and I look totally gross right now. So my question is, in Lean UX, we're told very specifically no heroes. And I know that's going to go, whoa, hey, wait, this whole thing was about heroes. I'm certainly not trying to contradict what you're saying. I'm trying to, and maybe you already covered this. I had to step out for a few minutes to answer the door. But anyway, my question is, in Lean UX, it's really specific that there are no heroes. And what they mean by that is that you are no better or worse than the rest of your team, that you seek to integrate with your team, that you do have a specific role on your team, but that you are first and foremost a team member. How do you balance that with the need to be a leader on the team, to set a good example for UX, etc.? I said etc. That's what I meant.
Yeah, that's a great question, Neil, and I think you probably did step out for that. One of the moments in the superhero journey is assembling with your team, making sure that you're a part of that team and identifying your role within the team. So being the superhero, right, is kind of what I said at the end. You might not be the designer that your team necessarily wants, but the one that they need, right? Because sometimes they want you to take full control of everything, have that responsibility, be that superhero, but sometimes you have to really try and integrate yourself a lot more than just throwing designs over a wall, right? We want to be a part of those teams. We want to be integrated. But sometimes that means we have to really reflect on what we're capable of doing and kind of cool our jets, right? Because we get really excited. We start drinking the Kool-Aid. We love what we do. And
Yeah.
it's super frustrating, right? When you see somebody going down the wrong path, right? So this summer I went to Arches with my family and my kids, and we've all had a moment like this if you have kids. My 4-year-old, we're all having fun. We're walking along the paths. There's this little bridge. It's probably only 4 feet up, right? But my 4-year-old turns around and starts walking backwards. And you're like stop, like freeze, like what do I say to get you to absolutely freeze in place right now? And you fail, and he falls off the edge of the thing. Luckily, he did a face plant into some sand, missed a rock or two, right? Just crying, and he was okay, right? But those are the things that we get that same feeling when we look at an organization or a company, and we've done research, and we look at them, and they're not going the right direction. So we can get super passionate about it. But sometimes we have to go take a step back and start a lot smaller in building that trust for our teams.
I think that that's a really good way of looking at it. And I would say, just be completely transparent here. I've made that mistake. I get so excited about what I do. I pushed my very low maturity UX organization too hard. And as a result, I had to rebuild trust. And I think that you have to toe that line, especially because agile processes are all about integration with the team and going along with the ceremonies, and that's absolutely true. We need to do that as designers. I'm a firm advocate for that. At the same time, I think that we need to respect our role. So I think what you said is, like the designer that they need, not necessarily. No, what would you say? Want, not need. I know it's a Batman quote.
Yeah. Be the designer. We aren't necessarily the designer that they want, but we'll be the designer that they need.
There
Right?
you go. Yeah.
We might not be flashy. We might not give them everything that they want, but we sure as heck need to give them what they need.
Yeah. I think that's a great way of looking at it. Thank you, Matt. Appreciate that.
Yeah.
Hey, can you hear me? Okay, cool.
Yeah.
Hey, I had some questions about form versus function. So specifically, I am designing an application that is an end-to-end encrypted messaging application. And I'm going about designing the back end and then creating the front end around that. And maybe you've been thrown into that position before. What do you think of in terms of design? Should you design the front end around the back end or the back end around the front end?
Well, Evelyn, that is a great question. And I think it's a little of both, to be honest, because there are certain situations, and you talk to any of these guys that I work with and anyone here in the organization that's UX, we are data-driven decisions, right? And what you're talking about is building something. There's two types of designs, right? One of the situations I talked about in saving 6 months worth of work was that we had our stakeholders wanted a brand new calendar application with bars and all this stuff, and they said, hey, design me a calendar, right? And it's like, if I were to design that calendar, it might take me 3 weeks to 3 months to customize a complete calendar. And so I went to my developers and I said, okay, find me something that meets the list of requirements. So we're looking at function first. And then you give me that and we'll skin it. We'll make it with the styling and the style guide and everything that we need to do. Right. And so it ended up taking us only 6 weeks to get that done instead of 6 months. So what you're talking about, there are situations, right, that when we're talking about design or UI, that you would definitely go function first. Where there's a little miscommunication is that design is not just the look and feel, but also how something functions. So when we talk about design, we're also talking about function for the user from their perspective. So you may say they just need to click a button, right? But we're looking at what is the design before they click the button, as they click the button, and after they click the button. What are some communication methods even needed around that? For instance, are we going to pop in a snack bar because the button made something a success? Are we going to instead pop up a modal because it was a failure and they now need to take an action on it? So when we say design, we're talking about a structural type of design that goes along with the visual. So function for us, and I hope I answered your question, Evelyn. I know we're out of time, but function for us is really what we want first, because if it doesn't work, it doesn't work, no matter how good it looks, right?
Right. Okay. So if you were handed a bunch of models and the inputs and the outputs, you could then use that to generate the design.
Right. I mean, from what it sounds,
Okay.
I have handled something like that, right? There's inputs, outputs, and then we will design around that, build upon it. But hopefully it's something where we're all working together. We're talking through this, right? So
Cool. Hey, thank you so much.
Yeah, no problem. Thank you, everyone, for your time. I do have another scheduled meeting for one of my teams I have to join. But thank you so much for coming. And if you have more questions, please reach out.
Thank you, Matt. Great job. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, Matt.
Great day.